Welcome to the Mobile Application Framework YouTube channel. My name is Frank Imphius and I'm from the Oracle Application Development and Mobility Tools Product Management team. In this episode I talk about SOAP data control. We talked about data controls and I mentioned that the data controls are the key recipe of production and productivity for MAF developers. Now one of these data controls deals with SOAP-based services. And I'm not going here into an in-depth discussion of SOAP versus REST. Reality is that even if we all think that REST is the best way to build services, existing services might speak SOAP. You might have an existing SOA infrastructure, you might have additive business components that you can expose through the service interface as a SOAP service today, or you have annotated EGBs exposed as a SOAP service. Now for everything that's existing we have to find support within MAF, and for that reason we do have SOAP service support within MAF. So there is a need to have SOAP services supported on a mobile client, even if you think that the future speaks REST. The nice thing about SOAP, and I mentioned that already, is that there are many ways to expose existing business services as a SOAP service. I mentioned additive business components, the service interface, and I mentioned EGBs, and I mentioned SOA. So there are many ways that already exist to easily expose your service. And then because of the WSDL file, which is a well-known structure, there's a lot of tooling support that allows you to build the SOAP client, the service client, declaratively. And so you can do that in MAF as well. And in MAF, the client is called the SOAP data control. So the SOAP data control, how to create it? Well, we start with a normal mobile application framework application. So you see there is an application controller project and there's a view controller project. Wherever you name the view controller project, it's up to you. Here it's just the default name, which is view controller. You right mouse click on that view controller project, or from the top level menu you choose File, New, and then you choose from a gallery, which is the overview of all of the options then that you have available. In this gallery you select the web service entry, which is under business services, and that has another item in it which allows you to create a SOAP service data control or a REST data control. So in our case, because we're talking about SOAP services, we select the SOAP option, we provide it a name, and this is the name of the data control that we're creating, and then we provided a reference to the WSDL file. Well, that for sure is a remote reference first, so that's kind of the WSDL file that resides on some remote server that you can access through a URL, but you have the choice, and you see this checkbox, to copy that WSDL file locally, and that is what I would recommend you do. Because if you want to develop your application even without being connected to the internet, it's always good to have the structure definition, which is a WSDL file, locally within the project. You can always delete it and refresh it, but for now, in the beginning, it's always good to have it locally, because that allows you to even work within that project and get the structure even if you're not being able to access the service. The service could be down for maintenance, for instance. When you step through the wizard, one of the things you see is that we show you on the left hand side all of the procedures, the methods that you can call and invoke on the remote service, and you select. Now this is kind of a contract that you create between everything that exists in the service and everything that an application developer would care for. So everything that's on the right hand side will later on show in the data control panel. So here's the data controls DCX file, and you also see at the bottom of this screenshot there's the data control panel, and we do see the data control node as part of the panel. And starting from here, we do have the choice, of course, declaratively, visually, to change the connection. Now say that I developed a SOAP service access to a test machine, and now I want to move on to a production machine. Now the easiest way to change that reference is just to click on the data control, and then on the context menu just choose edit and change the endpoint. You also see that there is a setting in the context menu which is about security and securing web services. Very important. Remember what I said about data protection in the first episode on remote data access. It's not covered in this episode, but there will be a later episode just purely on security, where we also explain how you secure SOAP services within MAF. But that is the option that you would use for that. And then you have the data control structure. That's no longer new to us because we talked about data controls and data control elements and structures in the previous episode of this training. So we're just going over it. You see that's the structure of my SOAP service, which represents the department infrastructure. What I can do in the data controls panel, and that's maybe very good as information to share, is I can just select the data control and go to the edit data control section, and what that would allow me is to rerun the SOAP service configuration. So maybe I want to add additional methods that previously I haven't selected, and I want to expose more methods on the data control. So how do you work with SOAP services? Of course, declaratively, everything that's in the data control panel can be dragged and dropped as a collection, as an attribute, as an operation, straight to the mobile page, and then rendered as the user interface component. But I can also invoke SOAP services from Java. Often there might be a reason to programmatically invoke a method, or to programmatically get some data and work on data, maybe filter data. And the two options, the two choices when you want to access a web service through Java is what I put on that slide here. And it says manage bean, yeah, that would be for a quick query, but also POJO data control. As said, the POJO data control is kind of the ultimate silver bullet here, because I could put a POJO data control as a proxy upfront a SOAP data control, and then with every data that is queried from the service, I can decide to filter it, to aggregate it, or to cache it. And with every information that the user puts in and wants to write back to the service, I can put additional validation in there. So POJO data control as a proxy might be a viable use case to use programmatic access to the web service. Having the ability to access the information through Java is the one thing, but we have to better understand how exactly that works. I'm not going into all of the information here, but at least what I want to do is I want to guide you through some of the techniques. So there will be a separate recording that just deals with accessing data controls from Java. So that's a very late episode, and that will have the SOAP service as an example. Now, when you call a SOAP service from Java, you do this through the web service data control. We're currently on Java 1.4 in MAF. Yes, I know, it's a fairly old release of Java. Will change soon, and then we probably will have a web service proxy capability in MAF. But right now, state of the art is we don't have that. So you have to work through the web service data control, which is not too bad. So the web service data control is your proxy into calling a remote service. What you need to do is you need to get access to the payload that comes back from the service. Now, the first thing that the SOAP data control does is it transforms the payload, which is XML, into a Java object, and that is an object called generic type. And I show you in this later episode where I just talk about data control programming, I show you exactly what you can do and how easy it is, and how MAF helps you to transform the generic type information into entities that you are used to work with, for instance, on web modules or enterprise Java Bean models. Yeah? So that really helps it to simplify interaction with that and access from Java. But for now, the information, which is enough to give, is that every XML payload is turned into a generic type so that you can access it from Java. So what we need to cover later, and I mentioned that already because we want to go with a structured approach in this training, we cover later the programmatic access of SOAP services, or in general data controls from Java. There's a later episode that I will cover all of this in detail. You will see a lot of code slides, hopefully not too much, but that will give you the idea of how to do this in practice, so you learn enough to get started. And then we defer everything about security to a later episode, because security is an important area and a big area, a complex area, not so much in the sense of how it's exposed in MAF, but so much in the sense of how security is dealt with for mobile applications and mobile frameworks in general. So a lot of infrastructure on the server side and a little bit of infrastructure provided by MAF. Yeah, and the two has to come together, and that would be too much just to cover here. So we cover that later on. So for now, let's finish that presentation with a little exploration of how to build a SOAP service. So just go with a simple one, building the weather reports, and then I see you back.
This is JDeveloper 12.13 with the MAF extension installed. And in this demonstration, I will show you how you create a SOAP service access in MAF. I do have two projects, the application controller project and the view controller project, which is what you get when you start building a MAF application from the provided template without changing the naming of the different projects. I expand the view controller project, and here I have a text file I added just for demonstration purposes, which contains the URL of a web service that I found on the internet. And this web service provides weather information for a specific area in the United States. And I identify this area by the zip code of the city or the area that I'm interested in knowing about the weather. What you see here is we see that this is a WSDL reference. So if I copy this, then I select my project, right mouse click, new, and I choose from gallery. If I did run the SOAP service creation wizard before, then I would have an entry in here which will allow a direct access. So let's go to from gallery, and then because it's a data control I'm creating, I don't look for it in the web service section, but in the data control section. And there I find web service, data control, SOAP or REST. So I OK this, I give it a name, let's call it SOAP weather. The selection is on SOAP, and all I do is I paste the WSDL file reference into this dialog. I also have a checkbox selected, copy WSDL locally, which is useful because then I'm not dependent on the web service access. So if I'm offline or if the web service is down for maintenance reason or whatever, I can still continue developing on my project as I'm not blocked out. However, we only need that information at design time to know about the structure of the data. At runtime, that's all fine. We will go to the web service and query the data, and then we know about the structure as well. So I do the next step, and now I need to have an internet connection. In case if this fails, if this step fails for you, you want to go to the JDeveloper preferences, because chances are that you're behind a firewall. So if you're in a company like I'm in Oracle, I'm behind a firewall, then you would have to set the proxy settings. And if you go to the JDeveloper preferences, you scroll down the preferences, you find browser settings, and these browser settings allow you to specify the proxy settings, and then you will have internet access. If you're not behind a firewall, then you should see exactly the dialog that I see here. And the WSDL file describes two service types, a weather SOAP 1, 2 and a weather SOAP, and I assume they are just of different SOAP types or versions. What I'm interested in is the get city weather by zip, and I select this. Note that there are three types of functionality exposed by the service, and I only want to have one. So I can pre-filter the available list of functionality in a service and only expose those functionalities on my data control that I'm really interested in. So I have this selected, go next. I can provide XSD information if I need, but I don't have that. More important, if this is a protected web service, if this requires authentication, I can provide endpoint authentication in here. And then I hit finish. Okay, and now it opens up the data controls DCX dialog. I have my SOAP weather report. It has a method, get city weather by zip, and which expects a string, which is the zip code like 19922 for Beverly Hills, and it returns a collection. And this collection, if I click on this, has this set of attributes with the information about the weather situation in that area. So let's have a look here. There's a AMX page I created for the weather report. So now I'll go to the data controls, and in the data controls panel I also see my SOAP weather. I hit refresh so I can see the two by default generated data controls as well. Whenever you open the data controls panel and it doesn't show the data control you created or just shows empty, hit this refresh button because it will reread the metadata and then it will show the data controls. So on my SOAP weather I have the method, the parameter, and I have the collection. Now what I can do is I can drag the method onto my page as a parameter form. So this now creates a command button for me, and it also has an input text field that points, if we go to the bindings, it points to a variable because this information is just temporarily stored until I hit the command button, so it passes the information on. And then I can take the collection and drag and drop the collection in and choose read-only form, and then select what is the information I want to see on my page, and this now will add to the bindings here. And now I have attributes, and these attribute value bindings now point to the iterator, and the iterator accesses through the data control the method on the web service. So going back to my page, this is information that got created. What I can do even further now is, initially when this page renders, then it tries to invoke the web service because the collection is bound to the web service. Now I could go to the panel form layout here. Okay, say, okay, this panel form layout should, that's the wrong one. I need to go to this one here. And this should only be rendered if there is an input value provided by the user in the search field. So for this, I can go to the property inspector, use the expression builder, and here I can now access the search field. And remember, the name was zip. Here is my attribute value binding for the zip, and then I can have the input value, and it automatically creates the expression language. Now, if I now say, okay, if this content is length, if the length of this content is larger than 1, of course, probably before that I will check if it's null, because just in case there's no object at all. But this now added to the rendered property of the panel form layout, which you see here. And you also see this line here indicating that it cannot access the object to evaluate its value, because that is because we don't run it yet. Yeah, but I can see here that, or in fact I think it's complaining because it's not putting it in greater than. No, it remains the same. Anyway, you get the idea. So here I can dynamically return true or false based on the evaluation of this comparison here. And then as soon as I hit the command button, I have a value in there and the form will show. So this is basically how you create the data control pointing to a SOAP service, which is what I did here, and also how you work with that SOAP data control. So here's my page definition file, the data controls DCX file that contains the SOAP data control, and now I have a data bindings CPX file that brings it all together, and it also has a data control reference.
Welcome back. To wrap up this session, so in this session I talked about SOAP service support. I talked about configuring SOAP services, accessing the services, how they're exposed on the data control panel. I also showed you a demo and how to work with the SOAP service, how to build the user interface out of that. So I hope that gave you enough information to get started with SOAP services. The next episode will be all about REST. So we're starting with RESTful services with an introduction, and later on I will also show you how to build data controls against the REST service for ease of use and declarative development within MAF. See you then.